The White House told the world on Wednesday afternoon that Spain had backed down. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stood at the podium and announced with confidence that Madrid had heard the president's message and had agreed to cooperate with the U.S. military. It was a clean narrative. Trump threatened, Europe blinked, American power prevailed. There was one problem. It was not true. Spain's Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez went on Spanish national radio within hours and said this: "The spokeswoman may speak for the White House, but I am the Foreign Minister of Spain. I categorically deny it." Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, in a nationally televised address on the same evening, reduced his government's position to 4 words: no to the war. The Prime Minister's official residence, the Moncloa Palace, put out a formal statement describing the White House claim as false. And within 24 hours, the entire European Union had mobilized its institutional weight, its trade commissioners, its council president, its most powerful heads of state, in formal solidarity behind a single NATO ally that had told the most powerful military in the world, "You cannot use our bases." Let's go through all of it precisely, because every word of what follows is confirmed from multiple primary sources published in the last 20 hours. AP, PBS, France 24, Al Jazeera, The Hill, CNBC, Dawn, Morocco World News, France 24, and GB News, all from March 4th and 5th, 2026. Start with the timeline because the sequence matters enormously. On Sunday, March 2nd, Spanish Foreign Minister Álvarez announced that Spain would not allow U.S. forces to use Naval Station Rota and Morón Air Base in southern Spain for operations against Iran. Those bases were established in 1953 under an agreement signed during the dictatorship of General Francisco Franco and have been used by American forces for every major U.S. military operation across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East since. Álvarez said Spain's position was that the U.S.-Israeli strikes were unilateral outside the UN Charter and that Spain would have no part in them. On Tuesday, March 3rd, at least 11 KC-135 refueling tankers departed both bases. Trump, sitting in the Oval Office with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, responded by threatening to cut off all trade with Spain, saying the country was terrible and adding, "We could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it." On Wednesday afternoon, Leavitt announced Spain had agreed to cooperate. Álvarez went on Cadena SR radio and said, "The position of the Spanish government regarding the war in the Middle East, the bombing of Iran, and the use of our bases has not changed one iota. Not a single comma has changed, and I have no idea whatsoever what they might be referring to." Deputy Prime Minister María Jesús Montero reinforced the message with a line that has since gone around the world: Spain will not be vassals to another country. Sánchez, in his televised address, was direct and unsparing. He said his government would not be complicit in something that is bad for the world and that is also contrary to our values and interests, simply out of fear of reprisals from someone. He then invoked the 2003 Iraq War as a deliberate cautionary parallel. The world, Europe, and Spain have faced this critical moment before. In 2003, a few irresponsible leaders dragged us into an illegal war in the Middle East. He said, "You can't respond to one illegality with another, because that's how humanity's great disasters begin. You can't play Russian roulette with the destiny of millions." And he said the powers involved must immediately cease hostilities and choose dialogue and diplomacy. And the rest of us must act with coherence, defending now the same values that we defend when we talk about Ukraine, Gaza, Venezuela, or Greenland. This is not the language of a government preparing to quietly cooperate. This is the language of a government that has calculated it can absorb the pressure and hold its position. The financial markets made the same calculation. Spain's IBEX 35 stock index was the top performer among Europe's major stock exchanges on Thursday, up 0.7%. The Pan-European Stoxx 600 was up 0.2%. Former Spanish Foreign Minister Arantxa González, now Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs at Sciences Po, appeared on CNBC Thursday morning and explained why markets were not panicking. "Spain does not have an autonomous trade policy," she said. "Spain's trade policy is the European Union's trade policy. Let's keep calm, cool heads. This is not the first time that we have seen threats of this kind." She added, "What do they all have in common? Starmer, Zelensky, Fredrickson, and now Sánchez. They have said no, or they have questioned the motives of the U.S. president. and the leaders who stood firm were more likely to be in a better position over the long term. Gonzalez issued a direct warning to Washington. It would be foolish of the U.S. to pursue a trade embargo against Spain. Now, let's talk about what the European Union actually did, because this is where the story takes on its full institutional weight. European Commission trade spokesperson Olaf Gill issued a formal written statement Wednesday morning. The EU and the United States concluded an important trade agreement last year. The European Commission expects the United States to fully respect the commitments made in our joint statement. The Commission will ensure that the interests of the European Union are fully protected. We stand in full solidarity with all member states and all their citizens, and through our common trade policy, we stand ready to act if necessary to safeguard the interests of the EU. That is the European Commission, in formal institutional language, saying that a trade threat against Spain is a trade threat against all 27 member states, and that it is ready to respond accordingly. EU Internal Market Commissioner Stéphane Séjourné was more direct. He told reporters on Wednesday, "A threat to one member state is a threat to the whole European Union." European Council President Antonio Costa called Sanchez directly to express the EU's full solidarity and posted on X, "The EU will always ensure that the interests of its member states are fully protected." European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called Sanchez to express the same. French President Emmanuel Macron also called Sanchez to convey his personal European solidarity in response to the recent threats of economic coercion targeting Spain. And German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who had been sitting in the Oval Office with Trump just 24 hours earlier, where he joined Trump in criticizing Spain's NATO spending, walked back his position sufficiently to tell reporters Wednesday that he had told Trump explicitly that Spain cannot be excluded from any EU trade arrangement. "There is no way to treat Spain particularly badly," Merz said. "The EU architecture, it turns out, makes the threat structurally very difficult to execute. The EU negotiates trade on behalf of all 27 member states. A bilateral embargo on Spain, without triggering a full EU response, would require the kind of legal acrobatics that even Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, when pressed on CNBC, could only describe as a combination effort." He did not explain further. What Bessent did say clearly, however, is worth recording precisely. On CNBC's Squawk Box, Bessent said, "President Trump's frustration with the Spanish government is justified. They are the only NATO member not meeting their NATO requirement. That's known as a free rider." And then it was unacceptable over the weekend that the Spanish were highly uncooperative regarding the U.S. bases and what we could do with our planes. Anything that slows down our ability to engage and prosecute this war in the fastest, most effective manner puts American lives at risk. The Spanish put American lives at risk. That is the United States Treasury Secretary publicly accusing a NATO ally, one whose sovereign authority to decide the use of its own military bases is established in international law, of endangering American soldiers by exercising that authority. Alvarez, asked about Bessent's trade threat on Spanish radio, responded, "Why would a country like Spain have anything to fear?" The contrast with Portugal is worth noting. France 24 confirmed Wednesday that Portugal has authorized the United States to use an airbase on its Azores archipelago in the Atlantic, conditionally, for Iran-related operations. The Azores base sits in the mid-Atlantic and has been used in previous U.S. military operations, including Afghanistan and Iraq. Portugal said yes. Spain said no. They are neighboring NATO allies. The difference, analysts note, lies in a combination of political leadership. Sanchez is the EU's most prominent remaining left-wing leader, and a reading of European public opinion. A CIS poll published this week found that 77% of Spaniards hold a bad or very bad opinion of Donald Trump. That is not a political environment in which capitulation is a viable option. Now let's turn to the United Kingdom, because the same argument has been playing out in London, with different contours, a sharper tone from Trump, and a more complicated ending. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer initially refused to allow American forces to use British bases for the opening strikes on Iran. Trump, from the Oval Office on Tuesday, said, "The UK has been very, very uncooperative. I'm not happy with the UK. It's taken 3-4 days for us to work out where we can land. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with." He told The Sun, "I never thought I'd see that from the UK. We love the UK. It's just a much different kind of relationship. It's very sad." Starmer's response in Parliament was clear. "We do not believe in regime change from the skies. I was not prepared to join a war unless I was satisfied there was a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. We all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learnt those lessons. Starmer's spokesman, when asked about Trump's Churchill comparison, said the UK and the US remained staunch allies. That is reflected in decades of that special relationship, whether it's on national security or trade or beyond. Starmer himself said, British jets are shooting down drones and missiles to protect American lives in the Middle East on our joint bases. That is the special relationship in action. Starmer ultimately cleared 2 British bases for American use, RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire and the jointly operated base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. GB News, citing Western officials, reported Thursday that U.S. bombers have not yet launched strikes from British bases, but are expected to arrive at RAF Fairford shortly. Those same Western officials said Iran is running out of ballistic missiles and will exhaust its current stockpile within days if it continues firing at its current rate, though they cautioned that this should not lead anyone to rule anything out. Allied nations across the Gulf are facing a degradation in their Patriot air defense interceptor stocks, the same officials said, meaning the window for air defense sustainability is narrowing. Spain said no. The White House said Spain changed its mind. Spain said the White House was lying. The EU mobilized behind Spain. The markets judged the trade embargo to be bluster. Besant could not explain how it would work. And 77% of Spanish citizens think Donald Trump is doing a bad job. The war that was supposed to end in 4 to 5 days is now entering day 6. The alliance that was supposed to hold is holding in pieces. Some pieces are where Trump expected them, others are not. And Spain is standing exactly where it was on Sunday morning, with the full weight of the European Union behind it. Stay with us.